I want you to imagine carrying a wound for more than 3 decades, a wound that no doctor can stitch, no medicine can numb. My wound wasn't physical, it was my daughter, Emily, disowning me in 1991. And the worst part? She didn't leave because I hurt her on purpose, she left because my body betrayed me. I had a heart attack on the night of her high school graduation. That was all it took for her to cut me out of her life. She never spoke to me again. When I say those words out loud, people shake their heads. They tell me she was too young to understand, that she would come back when she matured, when life softened her edges. But she didn't. 30 years passed, and the silence never broke. Do you know what it feels like to bury your wife young, raise your only child on your own, and then have her vanish from your life as if you never existed? That's the kind of emptiness that eats at a man. My name is Thomas Granger, but people call me Tom. I'm a steelworker by trade, or I used to be before retirement. Hard hat, heavy boots, grease under the fingernails, that was my life. I wasn't rich, I wasn't polished, but I had pride. My biggest pride, though, was Emily. She was the only family I had left after her mother, Sarah, passed away. I promised that girl I would always be there for her, every recital, every birthday, every achievement, and for years I kept that promise. Emily wasn't just my daughter, she was my anchor. I still remember one night when she was about 12. We were sitting at the kitchen table, me going over the bills, her working on a history project. Out of nowhere, she put her pencil down, looked me in the eye, and said, "Promise you'll never miss one of my big moments, Dad." I laughed at first, thinking it was just a kid's dramatic way of talking. "Never," I told her. "You're my reason for breathing, Em." She smiled, a little shy, but I could see the relief in her eyes. She believed me. She trusted me completely. That's why the night of her graduation haunts me. I can still feel the sting of betrayal in her eyes, though she never said it outright. She thought I broke that promise. She thought I chose something else over her, when the truth was my heart gave out, literally. But I'll get to that later. Right now, what I need you to understand is the gravity of what happened last month. After 30 years of silence, 30 years of unanswered letters and unopened birthday cards, I did something that would change everything. I donated my entire estate. Not to her, not to myself, but to a hospital. And not just any hospital, but the one that saved my life when my heart failed me in 1991. I gave them everything, but I did it in Emily's name. That decision set off a chain of events I never could have imagined. The hospital board, moved by the gesture, built a statue of me. Not just a plaque, not just a small thank you note, but a statue in the lobby of the new cardiac wing named after my daughter, the Emily Granger Cardiac Wing. When they held the unveiling ceremony, Emily showed up. 30 years after the night she turned her back on me, there she was, standing in front of my bronze likeness, reading her own name carved into stone. For the first time since 1991, our eyes met across a crowded room. Do you know what I did? I turned my back and walked away. Yes. After a lifetime of begging, writing, hoping for even a shred of forgiveness, when she finally came to me, I chose to walk. People ask me why. They call me cruel. They say I should have embraced her, fallen into her arms, and ended the cycle of pain. But I'll tell you something you don't yet understand. Forgiveness is not something you can demand. It is not something you can wait 3 decades for, like a paycheck that eventually arrives. No, sometimes forgiveness becomes a burden heavier than the sin that caused it. So I walked away. This is the story of how I lost my daughter, how I tried to win her back through love and sacrifice, and how I finally learned that letting go was the only way I could find peace. And if you've ever lost someone, whether through pride, anger, or just life's cruel timing, I want you to listen closely. Because this story is not just about me, it's about the silence between fathers and daughters, mothers and sons, husbands and wives. It's about the things we don't say until it's too late. Stay with me, because what happened at that unveiling changed me forever. When I tell you Emily was my whole world, I don't say it lightly. After her mother passed, it was just the two of us. Sarah, my wife, was the kind of woman who could light up a room with her laugh. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer when Emily was only 8. I remember the night she told me, her hands trembling as she clutched the test results. She said, "Tom, you're going to have to be both father and mother to her now." By the time Emily turned 10, Sarah was gone, and with her went the soft balance in our home. It was just me and my little girl against the world. I wasn't perfect, but I did everything I could to keep our lives steady. I packed her lunches, I tied her hair back in clumsy braids, I sat through hours of spelling practice at the kitchen table. I burned dinners more times than I can count, but Emily would laugh and say, "It's okay, Dad, we can always order pizza." We leaned on each other. She was more than a daughter. She was my partner in survival, and I made myself one promise after Sarah's funeral, that no matter what happened, I would always be there for Emily. Every concert, every game, every ceremony, front row, cheering her on. And for years, I kept that promise. When Emily played flute in the middle school band, I sat in the audience with tears in my eyes, clapping like she was the headliner at Carnegie Hall. When she joined the debate team, I stayed up late helping her practice arguments, even though, half the time, I barely understood the topics. "You don't need to understand, Dad," she said once, laughing. "Just pretend you're the opponent and keep asking me questions." And so I did. We were close, unbreakably close. I remember one winter when I picked up an extra shift at the steel mill to buy her a nicer Christmas gift. By the time I got home, it was midnight. She was asleep on the couch, a blanket slipping off her shoulders, her textbooks open in her lap. I tucked her in and whispered, "I'll never let you down, Em." That was the kind of devotion I had for her, quiet, steady, constant. But life has a cruel way of testing even the strongest promises. By the late 80s, I was working myself to the bone. 12-hour shifts, sometimes 7 days a week. My body was breaking down, though I refused to admit it. Chest pain, shortness of breath, dizzy spells. I told myself it was just fatigue, just age catching up. I was only in my 40s then, but steelwork hardens you and wears you down. Emily noticed. She'd catch me rubbing my chest or leaning too heavily on the counter. "Dad, you need to see a doctor?" She'd scold, her eyes wide with worry. I'd wave her off. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired." Looking back now, maybe that's where the first crack formed. She saw the signs before I was willing to face them, and she must have thought deep down that I wasn't listening, that maybe I didn't care enough about myself or about her future to take it seriously. Still, despite the warnings, we made it to 1991, Emily's senior year. She had blossomed into this sharp, ambitious young woman. She was top of her class, already accepted to college, determined to make something of herself. And she wanted me there for every step of it. She'd come home from school, toss her bag on the floor, and plop down at the kitchen table, rattling off her plans for the future. "Dad, I'm going to be the first in our family to graduate college. Can you believe that?" I'd smile, my chest swelling with pride. "I believe it. I always knew you'd do more than I ever could." Then, one night, about a month before her graduation, she said something that cut deeper than she realized. "Dad, promise me you'll be there. Don't let work or anything else get in the way." This is the biggest day of my life. I laughed and pulled her close. "Work? Nothing comes before you, Emily. Nothing." She looked me straight in the eye and whispered, "You always say that. Just don't break this one, okay?" I had no idea then how much weight those words carried. Looking back, I can see why she clung to that promise so tightly. She had lost her mother young, and in her heart, she must have feared losing me too. That graduation wasn't just about walking across a stage. It was about seeing her only parent there, watching with pride, proof that I had kept my word, and I meant every bit of it. I planned to be there. I ironed my only decent suit, polished, my shoes, even bought a small bouquet of flowers for her. That night was supposed to be a celebration of everything we had survived together. But fate doesn't care about promises. Fate doesn't ask permission before it strikes. And on the night I was supposed to keep my biggest vow, my body betrayed me. That was the night my heart gave out. June 7th, 1991. That date is burned into me like a scar. The night Emily was supposed to walk across the stage in her cap and gown, the night I promised I would be there in the audience with flowers in my hands and tears in my eyes. I remember coming home from work early that day. My foreman told me I looked pale and should rest, but I brushed him off. I had something far more important waiting for me. I went upstairs, laid my suit out on the bed, and placed the small bouquet of white roses next to it. Emily loved roses because her mother had planted them in our yard. I wanted her to see me holding them when she looked out into the crowd, but as I leaned over to tie my shoes, I felt a sharp pain shoot through my chest. Not the usual ache I had ignored for months, but something fierce, something crushing. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, clutching at the carpet like it might save me. The next thing I remember was waking up in a hospital bed, wires sticking out of me, machines beeping in steady rhythms. My throat was raw, my chest heavy. A nurse leaned over and whispered, "You had a heart attack, Mr. Granger. You're lucky to be alive, but not where I was supposed to be." I turned my head toward the clock. It was 9 p.m. Emily's graduation ceremony was already over. My heart might have survived, but I knew in that moment that something else had died, the promise I had made to my daughter. Later that night, my brother-in-law, Mark, came into the room. He looked uneasy, shifting from foot to foot. "Emily's upset, Tom. She doesn't want to come here tonight." I croaked out, She has to know I didn't choose this. Please, bring her." But she didn't come. The next morning, when I was strong enough to sit up, I saw her standing in the doorway of the hospital room. Her cap was still in her hands, her gown folded over her arm. She looked beautiful, radiant, every bit the young woman I knew she was becoming. But her face was stone. "Emily," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. "I'm so sorry." I was on my way. I swear I was on my way. She cut me off sharply. "You promised, Dad. You promised me." I didn't have a choice, I begged. My heart gave out. I couldn't control it. Her voice trembled with rage and grief. "You've been ignoring this for months. I told you to see a doctor. I told you to take care of yourself. You didn't listen. You broke your promise because you wouldn't take care of yourself for me. Do you understand what that feels like? To stand there alone while everyone else's parents cheered them on?" Her words stabbed deeper than any pain in my chest. I wanted to reach out, to hold her, to explain that I would have crawled across glass to be there if my body had let me. But Emily wouldn't let me get close. "You let me down," she whispered. Her voice cracked, but her eyes stayed cold. "And I don't think I can forgive you." Then she turned and walked out of the room. I thought it was anger talking. I thought, given time, she'd come back. That maybe when she saw the roses still wilting on the bed back home, she'd understand. I mailed her letters when she went off to college. I called her dorm. I even drove hours just to try and see her. Every attempt was met with silence. For years, I sent birthday cards and Christmas gifts. Sometimes they were returned unopened. Other times they vanished into the void, never acknowledged. Every December 24th, I sat by the phone, waiting for a call that never came. Every June 7th, I stared at that old graduation program, wondering if she still thought of me. The weight of that rejection crushed me more than the heart attack ever did. I kept replaying her words, "You let me down," over and over, as if my entire worth as a father, as a man, had been erased in one missed night. Family friends tried to convince her to forgive me, but she refused. He chose work. He chose his health. He didn't choose me. That's how she told the story. That's the narrative she carried with her. And so, The bond we built, the laughter, the late-night talks, the promises, collapsed in the shadow of one broken moment. From that day forward, I lived with a daughter who might as well have been a ghost. Word count, approximately 706 emotional beats, heart attack, missed graduation, Emily's confrontation, lifelong silence, retention cues, suspense, sharp dialogue, escalating grief. Flow leads naturally into Section 4, turning point, the estate donation. Would you like me to continue by expanding? Section 4, the turning point, decision action taken, into 700 words showing Tom's decision to donate his estate in Emily's name? You said, yes, expand Section 4 and do it in 700 words. By the time I reached my late 60s, the years had caught up with me. My hair had thinned to a pale silver, my hands shook when I buttoned my shirt, and I carried a cane, not because I liked the look of it, but because my knees no longer trusted me. I lived alone in the same modest house Emily grew up in, a house that had become far too quiet. Every corner of that home carried her shadow, the dent in the wall from when she crashed her bike into the porch steps, the faded growth chart penciled into the doorframe of her old bedroom. Even her high school yearbook still sat on the shelf, untouched, as if she might one day come back and want to flip through it with me. But she never came back. I tried, for years, to keep hope alive. Every holiday, I set a place at the table for her. Every birthday, I wrapped a gift. But by the time the third decade rolled past without so much as a phone call, hope had turned into something else, something heavier. Resentment, bitterness, the sharp edge of grief that never dulled. One winter night, I sat in my recliner staring at the stack of letters I had written to her over the years. Dozens of envelopes, each one filled with apologies, memories, and pleas. None of them had been answered. Most had been returned with return to sender stamped across them like a cruel brand. And that's when the thought hit me. I had spent my entire life trying to win back someone who didn't want to be won. Maybe I had been going about it all wrong. Maybe the way to honor her wasn't by begging for her forgiveness, but by doing something that proved my love without asking for anything in return. That night, I pulled out my will. What did I really have to leave behind? A house, a bank account I'd built from decades in the mill, and my wife's wedding ring. It wasn't much by the standards of the world, but it was everything I had. For years, I had dreamed of passing it to Emily, giving her security, giving her a piece of me. But what good was it to pass something to someone who had already erased me from her life? So I made the decision. I would give it all away, not to punish her, not to spite her, but to finally turn my pain into something meaningful. I called the hospital where I had been saved back in 1991, St. Catherine's, the same place where I opened my eyes to the news that I had missed my daughter's graduation, the same place that had kept my heart beating, even as it shattered. I asked to speak with the director of philanthropy. When she answered, I cleared my throat and said, "My name is Thomas Granger. I want to leave my estate to the hospital, but I want it named for my daughter, Emily." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, softly, she asked, "Would you be willing to come in and talk about it?" When I arrived, they treated me with a kindness I hadn't felt in years. They asked about Emily, about why I wanted to do this. I told them everything, how she was my only child, how she hadn't spoken to me in 30 years, how I had failed her the night she needed me most. By the time I finished, the director's eyes glistened with tears. "Mr. Granger," she said gently, "this is one of the most selfless acts I've ever witnessed. We can make sure your daughter's name lives on in a way that brings healing to others." And so, the Emily Granger Cardiac Wing was born. But they didn't stop there. The hospital board decided that my contribution deserved more than just a plaque. They commissioned a bronze statue of me to stand in the new wing's lobby, a likeness of me in my work boots and cap, a steelworker's stance, humble but resolute. I never asked for that honor. Frankly, I didn't want it. But they insisted. "You're the reason this is possible," they said. "We want future patients and families to know the story." When I received the letter about the unveiling ceremony, my hands shook. It wasn't the statue that made my heart pound. It was the note at the bottom. "Your daughter, Emily, has been invited as next of kin to witness the dedication." For the first time in 3 decades, fate had written us into the same sentence. I didn't know if she would come. I didn't know if I could face her if she did, but I knew this. I had finally done something for her that couldn't be returned to sender. Something she couldn't ignore. And part of me wondered, would this act of love finally reach her in a way my words never had? The morning of the unveiling, I woke before dawn. My hands shook so badly I could barely button my shirt. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the face of a man weathered by 68 years, lines etched deep, eyes dim, but still searching for something. For her. The hospital lobby was buzzing when I arrived. Fresh flowers lined the entrance, the smell of lilies and roses filling the air. Cameras flashed as reporters adjusted their microphones. Doctors, nurses, board members, and donors mingled in small clusters, their voices echoing off the polished marble floor. At the center of it all was the statue, covered by a heavy velvet cloth. I could see the outline of the bronze figure beneath it. Broad shoulders, a proud stance. My stance. I hated the attention, but I reminded myself this wasn't about me. It was about Emily's name carved into stone above the entrance, the Emily Granger cardiac wing. I stood at the back of the room, leaning heavily on my cane. My chest tightened with every passing minute. Not from pain, though God knows the old heart still gave me trouble, but from the question burning inside me, would she come? Then I saw her. She walked through the doors in a navy dress, her hair pinned back the way her mother used to wear it. Time had sculpted her face into something sharper, more refined, but I would have known her anywhere. Emily, my daughter, my little girl who once held my hand crossing the street, who once whispered promises in the dark. My breath caught. For 30 years I had imagined this moment, rehearsed what I would say if it ever came. But as she stepped into the lobby, all the words I had prepared dissolved into silence. The crowd parted for her, as though they knew she was the center of this story. Whispers followed her. "That's his daughter. That's Emily." She didn't look at anyone. Her eyes moved straight to the plaque, reading her own name in bronze letters. Dedicated in honor of Emily Granger, beloved daughter. Her lips trembled. For the first time, I saw her mask crack. She looked up at the covered statue, then back down at her name, as though trying to reconcile 30 years of silence with this overwhelming gesture of love. The ceremony began. A board member stepped to the podium, thanking the donors, praising the hospital's mission. But I barely heard the words. My eyes were locked on Emily, and her eyes, slowly, finally, found mine. It was like being struck by lightning. 30 years collapsed in an instant. I saw everything in her gaze. The child who once trusted me, the teenager who felt abandoned, the woman who had carried bitterness like armor. And beneath it all, something else. Something softer, maybe even regret. "Ladies and gentlemen," the speaker announced, "we are proud to unveil the statue of Thomas Granger, whose sacrifice and generosity have made this wing possible." The velvet cloth was pulled away, and there I stood in bronze. Larger than life, work boots planted firmly, arms strong, face weathered but proud. The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. But I didn't look at the statue. I looked at Emily. Her eyes were brimming with tears. She pressed her hand to her mouth, whispering something I couldn't hear. Then she stepped forward just a little, and I saw her lips form the word, "Dad." My heart lurched. 30 years I had waited for that word. 30 years of empty birthdays, unanswered letters and unanswered prayers. And here it was, hanging in the air between us. But something inside me shifted. For decades, I had begged for her forgiveness, carried the weight of her rejection like a chain around my neck. And now, in that instant, I realized I didn't want to beg anymore. I didn't need her forgiveness to know who I was or what I had done. I had already proven my love not just to her, but to the world. So I turned my back. I didn't say a word. I didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't cry. I simply turned, gripped my cane, and began to walk away. The crowd seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. The applause faded into hushed silence. Behind me, I heard her voice crack through the quiet. "Dad, please, wait." My legs shook, but I kept moving. Step by step, I put 30 years of pain behind me. Each step felt like tearing open an old wound, but also like setting something free. People later asked me why. Why walk away when she finally reached out? Why waste the chance at reconciliation? But they'll never understand. In that moment, I wanted her to feel what I had felt for 3 decades, the hollow ache of someone turning their back. Not out of cruelty, but as a message. That forgiveness, if it ever came, had to be real, had to be hers to give freely, not dragged from her by guilt or spectacle. I walked out of the lobby and into the cool evening air. The sun was setting, the sky painted in streaks of gold and crimson, and for the first time in 30 years, I didn't feel like a man waiting for his daughter to come back. I felt like a man who had finally, painfully, let go. When I stepped out of the hospital that evening, the air felt different. The late summer sun had begun to dip below the horizon, washing the sky in shades of orange and purple. People were still inside, taking photos with the statue, clapping each other on the back, sipping glasses of wine to celebrate the new wing. But I wasn't there to celebrate. I was there to leave something behind. I walked slowly across the parking lot, leaning on my cane, each step echoing louder in my ears than the applause had minutes earlier. My chest felt heavy, but not from my heart this time. From the weight of everything I had carried and finally released. For 30 years, I had lived in the shadow of a single broken promise. I had replayed it in my mind over and over. The empty chair at her graduation, the roses wilting at home, the look in her eyes when she told me I had let her down. I thought the only way to make it right was to beg for forgiveness, to keep knocking on a door she refused to open. But forgiveness isn't something you can force. That was the lesson I had to learn the hardest way possible. When Emily called out my name inside that hospital lobby, my first instinct had been to run to her, to gather her into my arms like I had dreamed of for decades. But deep down, I knew that would have been for me, not for her. It would have been a desperate grab at closure, not a true reconciliation. So instead, I gave her a piece of what I had endured all those years, the sight of someone turning and walking away, not to punish her, not to hurt her, but to show her that silence cuts both ways. That night, I sat in my recliner with a photo album on my lap. Inside were pictures of Emily growing up, her first day of kindergarten, the time she won a spelling bee, the summer she scraped her knees learning to ride a bike. On the last page, tucked carefully behind the plastic sleeve, was the graduation program from 1991. For 30 years, I had kept it, waiting for the day I could show it to her and say, "See?" I was ready. I was coming. But as I turned those pages, I realized something I hadn't before. My love for her had never depended on her forgiveness. I had loved her through silence, through rejection, through 30 birthdays missed and 30 Christmases ignored. That love had built a hospital wing. It had saved lives. It had become something bigger than either of us. And maybe, just maybe, one day she would see that. I don't know what Emily thought when she saw me walk away. Maybe she felt anger. Maybe she felt the same hollow ache I had lived with for so long. Or maybe she finally understood how much I had given, even when she wasn't looking. What I do know is this. When I laid my head down that night, I felt peace for the first time in decades. Not joy, not triumph, just peace. Because I had finally stopped begging. The truth is, Reconciliation doesn't always come tied up in a neat bow. Sometimes the people we love never come back. Sometimes forgiveness never arrives. And sometimes the best we can do is leave behind something that proves we loved them anyway. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: don't wait. Don't assume tomorrow will give you another chance to say the words you need to say, because life doesn't ask for your permission before it rips those chances away. I missed my daughter's graduation because my heart failed me. I lost her for 30 years because pride and pain took over. But in the end, I gave her the only thing I could, my legacy. A wing filled with doctors and nurses who will save lives in her name. That is how I loved her, even in her absence. And maybe, if she ever walks those hospital halls again, she'll run her hand along the plaque with her name on it. Maybe she'll pause in front of the bronze statue and whisper the words she spoke to me that day, "Dad." And maybe, just maybe, she'll understand. So that's my story. A story about promises, heartbreak, and the weight of silence. If it touched you, if it made you think about the people in your own life you might still have a chance to reach out to, don't wait. Say what needs to be said while you still can. And if this story moved you, I'd be grateful if you could like this video so more people can hear it. Share it with someone who needs the reminder that love is fragile but worth fighting for. And I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment down below. Tell me your story. Have you lost someone you wish you could speak to again? Have you found forgiveness after years of silence? I read every single one, and your words matter. And if you want more stories like this, real stories about love, regret, and redemption, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss one. Thank you for listening, truly.